This is your reality check.
What's up, Cuboids? It's Adam here, bringing you something a little different for this Christmas-themed episode of the Reality Check. This is your show for December 18th, and, well, no one's joining me today. We're still on a short hiatus for the holidays, which is partly due to the birth of my son. Now, he came a bit early, kind of mixed things up for us. He'll be about 2 weeks old by the time you get this. Baby's doing well, his mother's doing well, everyone's doing great, so that's all good. And I felt like talking about the science of reindeers, and I didn't want to wait till next year to do it, so I figured we'll do this extra supplemental. A word of warning that this is going to be a little more like the science of gremlins than the science of climate change. Now, I know some of you don't really appreciate my sillier segments, and if that's the case, it's alright. We'll be back in 2019. You can tune in then. Now, first, a word about the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer TV special. This plays every year. I think it's great. I love it. Now, a few weeks ago, I saw a viral video by the Huffington Post stating, and I quote, "The holiday TV classic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is seriously problematic." Now, this included a description of how all the bad things in the special were being called out in 2017 and 2018. Now, the special is a story of Rudolph, a reindeer, who, like his fellow misfit Hermie, the elf who wants to be a dentist, is ostracized and bullied until he runs away to the island of misfit toys, only to return to the North Pole to save Christmas. Now, I won't pick apart the whole video, which is generally terrible, but I wanted to just touch on the first quoted tweet to get an idea, and this kind of explains the whole thing. So I quote, "Yearly reminder that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is a parable on racism and homophobia with Santa as a bigoted, exploitative prick." Well, this comment seemed odd to me as this is basically overtly the point of the special. Rudolph suffers hardship from his father, from Santa, from the reindeer game's coach, and all his other reindeer friends. But this is not presented as being enviable behavior. This is bad. It's considered to be bad through the whole thing. I tried to track down the original tweet from user @Garrett on Twitter.com, but it was deleted. So I creeped around his timeline and found him replying to some people talking about the special. I guess some others had found his name. They were sending him messages like, "Hey, you're terrible for hating this thing." So some highlights in his replies, and I quote, "It was made in 1964 in the midst of the Civil Rights Act. Coincidence? I don't think so. Cultural climate affects art, and if you don't think that TV special was trying to speak about racism, I don't know what to tell you." And another, "Did not call it racist or homophobic. Quite the opposite. It's a fable about overcoming racism and homophobia with Santa playing a bigoted prick. GTFOH. So the first guy quoted in the video gets it. Many others certainly did not, including a ton of people who seemed to be commenting while watching the special, not realizing how it would end. Just stay tuned till the end. You'll figure out that all these people, they kind of learn their lesson. That's what it's about. This isn't even a case of looking at an older piece of work, and in this case, a special from 1964, and putting it through a modern lens where some things don't really make sense or they're a bit outdated and racist. The morals expressed in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer actually hold up very well in 2018, and the somewhat generic lessons about accepting those who are different can easily be seen to be about racial diversity, about homophobia, or about any other discrimination that is more apt to the time in which you're viewing it. The issue is not that something inappropriate by today's standards was okay in 1964, but simply that some people do not have a sort of grade school level comprehension to be able to judge a fictional work and be able to determine who the good guy and bad guy archetypes are. Now, enough ranting about that. Let's talk about science, the science of reindeer. To start out, I will state the obvious. Reindeer are in fact real, but Santa Claus is most definitely not. So actual flying reindeer don't exist, and neither does Rudolph the talking flying reindeer who has human-like feelings and relationships with other reindeers, so the real answer to almost any of this is going to be, because it's not real, because they don't really exist. But we can still look at these things scientifically, and maybe learn a thing or two. First off, let's just get out of the way the idea that reindeer actually do exist. There are deer and moose and all sorts of things like that, but reindeer are actual animals that live in the northern parts of Europe, Siberia, and North America. Now here in North America, they are generally referred to as caribou, though I saw a couple of deer in my backyard as recently as last week, and I see them on the side of the road all the time. A reindeer or caribou is not something that I've ever seen in the wild. I've seen them in zoos and Pakamega and things like that. Because the North Pole is actually fairly desolate, there are no wild reindeer that live there. That said, there are also no wild humans or elves that are known to live in the North Pole. But Santa and his gang, if such a thing did exist, would exist in some sort of compound that would be equipped to feed and heat and shelter reindeer that would be there. Now, one idea I ran into while looking into this segment, which some of you listeners may have heard, is that Santa's reindeer must all be female because they have antlers. Now, this seems unintuitive at face value. Obviously, males are known to have bigger horns and antlers in most species, so what is this argument really about? Well, reindeer and caribou are the only deer in which males, females, and calves all produce antlers. As with other deer, the males will usually lose their antlers every year, and they are usually gone by January, meaning that they are unlikely to be there on December 24th when Santa makes the rounds. Now, it's possible, it's just not typical, and untypical over 9 different reindeers makes it very unlikely. Now, females keep their antlers until the spring after they've given birth, sort of a mechanism to protect them if anyone wants to get at them while they're pregnant. So, are the reindeer actually female in the stories we've heard? Well, it's generally assumed that they're male. In the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer song, Rudolph is male and is referred to with male pronouns, such as in the lines, "used to laugh and call him names," and "then all the other reindeer loved him." Now, the TV special I mentioned has Rudolph and the other sleigh-pulling reindeer presented as males as well. Rudolph's father is Donner, one of the 8 reindeer, and the coach is a male named Comet, who's another one of those sleigh-pulling reindeer. So how can any of this make sense? Well, they could be castrated males. Now, this is common for sledders, which Santa's reindeer are no doubt based on. Male reindeer are usually depleted and lean from mating with as many as a dozen females in the months leading up to December, so a castrated male would keep his strength for the winter. Again, looking at the 1964 stop-motion TV special, we see that some of the reindeer are not castrated, as Donner is the father of Rudolph, and he has antlers at the time of his son's birth, which would be in the spring. So, at the very least, this is potentially a problem with the special. Now, one possible explanation is that we see reindeer from a photo shoot or some sort of painting that's based on something earlier. I did some family Christmas photos this year, and I did them in November. I know it sounds phony, but a lot of people do this. Could the reindeer be doing the same thing? Maybe. Now, the answer is perhaps simply that Christmas reindeer don't exist. The reindeer of this particular story are based on sledders, which are often castrated males with antlers, or simply that the image of a reindeer at its most impressive looking is a reindeer with its actual antlers. So, can reindeer fly? Because Santa's reindeers seem to. Well, no, actual reindeer cannot fly. The one source I saw mentioned that the only mammals that fly are bats, and we'll get back to bats in a bit. Now, Santa's reindeer don't fly, and they don't actually have a mechanism by which they could fly. They don't have wings. Even if they had wings, they would have to be really huge to be able to lift something of their size. They don't have propellers. They don't have fans or some sort of reaction mass being thrust out of them like you would see with a rocket, for example. Now, even if the large bags of gifts on Santa's sleigh were filled with helium or hydrogen, it wouldn't be enough to lift the sled and those reindeer. The commonly accepted source for the reindeers flying is magic, and here at the Reality Check, we don't believe in magic because we're not fun. Now, there's the question of whether or not the reindeer could, if they could fly, pull Santa's sleigh. Well, reindeer on the ground can pull sleighs, so 8 or 9 of them could feasibly pull this sleigh. Now, we can do the math to suggest that Santa would need to pull some millions of toys, but this kind of math usually makes the whole Santa thing fall apart. Even with time zones, there's no accounting for delivering many Amazon warehouses full of gifts to so many children in one night. It's a story for children, and they don't really think of these big, huge, large numbers. So forget all the crazy numbers. A few reindeer could pull a sled packed with a reasonably small number of gifts, such as the images commonly seen depicting Santa and his reindeer. Finally, this takes me to the idea that gave me the inspiration to do this segment in the first place, and that is Rudolph's red nose. So do reindeers have red noses? Well, that's a bit of a different question. It can happen due to dense blood vessels or parasitic infection, but this is hardly what's going on with Rudolph. His red nose is bright, it lights up, and it can light the way in a storm. So that makes sense. This reminded me of some things which were mentioned in the Richard Dawkins book, The Blind Watchmaker, which I read recently. Excellent book. Anything by Richard Dawkins is great. Now, while discussing bioluminescence, and that's organisms which can produce light, it's mentioned that in no case is bioluminescence used to make a light source suitable for vision. That's not to say you can't see through bioluminescence, but that's not the purpose of it. One might assume that the ability to create light would help one see in dark conditions, but this is generally not the case. It is used for counter-illumination camouflage, for mimicry in order to lure prey, or for signaling such as for attracting mates. All told, bioluminescence has evolved some 40 times here on Earth, and in no case it proves anything like what we see with Rudolph's nose. So why not? Evolution makes creative uses of all sorts of things, and we see light with our eyes. So why hasn't a sort of natural flashlight evolved yet? Well, it seems like there's a much better way, and that's echolocation. Seeing through sound, especially in bats. Now, I never realized just how interesting echolocation was until I read The Blind Watchmaker, and I would recommend the book for a detailed exploration on echolocation alone, and just how this trait, evolved time and time again, is a perfect example of how evolution works. This basically works by having the animal create a sound, some sort of chirp, and then listening to it after it's bounced off an object to create a model of the world around them. This is proven to be an efficient way to see, so to speak, in the dark. And there are many different types of echolocation, and this ability is a great example of convergent evolution. So it's independently evolved in many organisms because it has a use, and they all kind of use it in slightly different ways, but for the same purpose. Rudolph, the echolocating reindeer, is not quite as sexy a concept as Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, but perhaps it could work, because it turns out some subspecies of reindeer are able to make a clicking sound with their knees, which is thought to be used to have them locate each other in a blizzard. Now, this is hardly useful for guiding Santa's sleigh, unless there are reindeer here and there as reference points, but maybe if you're really going for a scientifically accurate reindeer story of how to guide someone in the storm, you could use this as a basis for it. Now, finally, I have a sort of basic physics beef with Rudolph's nose. How bright would it need to be? So again, if we go back to the 1964 special, we see that Rudolph's nose shines brightly enough to make others wince, but they don't seem blinded by it. One elf is seen wearing sunglasses to shade from it at one point, and it's just kind of a gag. Now, Rudolph's never blinded by his own nose, and he's generally the one closest to it. If you look at the way he's depicted in the cartoon, his eyes are directly exposed to his nose, which is right there. Santa's sleigh flies high in the air, and Rudolph's nose is meant to be bright enough to see over large distances. Even assuming that it's only the brightness of a simple car's headlight, which is fine to see on the road, but probably not in the sky like that, this is a very bright thing right at the tip of his face a few inches from his eyes. Anyone who's had a car come at them with its high beams on can see that this can blind a person to anything else going on, and those cars don't get close enough to be a few inches from one's face. Now, Rudolph's nose isn't a directed light like an actual headlight. It's a very round, shiny, multi-directional light source, so his nose should be just as bright to his eye as it shines in front of his face. Rudolph would be blinded while guiding the sleigh, leaving only others to be able to see it. But this isn't generally how it's depicted. We don't see Rudolph with a blindfold over his face going blindly through while everyone else is guided, because if that were the case, well, any time his red nose is exposed, he'd be completely blind. Now, this all comes down to the inverse square law. The intensity of light is inversely proportional to the square of the distance. So there's some math involved there, but basically, the light is really bright near its source, and then it dims very quickly with the distance. Now, Rudolph's eyes are very close to his nose, but all of these houses and mountains and whatever Santa's going to be using as reference points to see, they're very far off in the distance. So for that light to be bright enough to see, it would really be blinding Rudolph. So, what have we learned here? Reindeer are real. They don't fly. They don't have magic shiny noses. Uncastrated males don't have antlers at Christmas. Sorry to bust your bubble. I hope you all have a really nice Christmas, or whatever it is you're likely to celebrate in the next few days. And don't worry, the reality check will be back with all of us in the new year. And until next time, peace out, Cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.
This is our show for December 22nd, and it's really the 22nd?